So you have to wonder, right, if the whole global stage feels so chaotic right now, so um, unrooted, this constant noise, this constant geopolitical shuffling, is it because the traditional anchor, the established center of material power, was just inherently built for temporary dominance?
I think so.
Is it already going silent in the, I guess, the spiritual narrative that's starting to take shape?
It's more than silent. I'd say it's absent when you really trace the deeper historical patterns, the prophetic ones.
Okay.
I mean, if you believe the ultimate reckoning isn't about sheer military might or financial capital, which is basically America's entire domain, its short-term role, then the whole structure built around that material center is designed to just collapse inward.
And that leaves the stage open.
It leaves the stage open for places that hold a profound memory, a real spiritual weight, a history that was forged through just sheer endurance. We're looking at the Pacific.
And if the rising center is the Pacific, then the place where that tension, that spiritual and material conflict is most, almost agonizingly visible. It has to be the Philippines. It's the ultimate crucible for this.
Precisely. You have a nation of just staggering world-class potential. I mean, a physical beauty that rivals literally anywhere on Earth. A deep cultural and spiritual foundation that somehow survived 4 centuries of colonial domination. And yet it's perpetually undercut. It's undermined by the very political and economic architecture that was built on top of that land.
It's that gap, that profound, almost unbearable gap. The distance between what the Philippines is, this land of staggering human and natural potential, and what it becomes when you filter through its current political and, frankly, extractive economic structures.
Yeah.
So I think our mission today is to really analyze the architecture of that gap, to figure out how these thousands of disparate islands were, well, forced into a single nation, and then why that resulting structure seems so determined to sabotage its own future, turning all that immense potential into a perpetual struggle. Let's do it.
So let's start with the basic geography, because the very existence of the Philippines as a unified nation of over 115 million people is, from a pure engineering perspective, a logistical nightmare.
Oh, completely.
We're talking about 7,641 islands. That's just an impossible administrative challenge for any pre-modern state.
It's an anti-nation, architecturally speaking. Before the Spanish fleet showed up in the 16th century, there was no Philippines. It didn't exist as a concept.
Right. What was there instead?
What existed was this loose collection of highly diverse, semi-autonomous maritime communities. These were the barangays.
And we shouldn't think of these barangays as just like tiny isolated villages, right? Some of these were sophisticated city-states, small kingdoms.
Absolutely. They had incredibly intricate trade relationships. Some were highly localized, essentially nomadic tribes living in the mountainous interiors, but others were very sophisticated Islamic sultanates in the south, like Maguindanao and Sulu.
And they were already tied into these broader networks. Exactly. Broader Arab and Malay networks. Then you had coastal areas that were heavily involved in trade with Ming Dynasty China and other regions that were under Indonesian Hindu control. There was just no single unifying identity, no single language.
So the big question is, what was the glue? What managed to hold all those thousands of fragments together long enough for this final construction of a nation to actually happen? Because it wasn't organic.
No, not at all. It was entirely imposed. And it happened through 2 distinct colonial processes. First, the Spanish. They arrived for good in 1565 and provided that initial administrative unity.
Right.
They governed the whole territory as the Captaincy General of the Spanish East Indies, which, and get this, was actually run from Mexico City.
Wow.
Yeah. And that lasted for over 300 years.
And the primary legacy of those 3 centuries was Catholicism. That became the singular binding agent for all these disparate groups.
Yes, and this is where the psychological nuance is just so vital. Catholicism was, initially, it was the tool of Spanish subjugation. It was an administrative tool. But when the Filipino Revolution finally ignited in the late 19th century, led by thinkers and revolutionaries like Jose Rizal, the striking outcome was that the people rejected the Spanish rulers. They rejected their often brutal governance, but they did not reject the shared Catholic faith.
How does that even happen? How do you reject the oppressor but then internalize their primary spiritual framework so completely?
Because over centuries, that faith had been localized. It was internalized. It stopped being theirs and became ours. It became a source of community strength, a common language of the spirit, and eventually a defining characteristic of being Filipino.
It was a shared worldview.
A shared worldview that distinguished them from both the Islamic South and the non-Christian tribes up in the mountains. It became, in a way, an identity shield.
But, historians often point out that Spanish rule, especially outside of Manila or Cebu, it was actually pretty weak. The administrative state was thin on the ground.
It was.
It was the Americans who came in and provided the necessary institutional muscle after 1898.
That's the second piece of glue. It's the modern bureaucracy and the military grip that was imposed by the American insular government. After the incredibly brutal Philippine-American War, the Americans established a far firmer, more ubiquitous state presence than the Spanish ever could.
And crucially, this era is what enshrined English as the near-universal lingua franca.
Right, primarily through a centralized public education system. They built schools everywhere.
So the resulting Filipino identity, it's not rooted in some singular ancient Malayo-Polynesian tongue. It's really a unified post-colonial framework defined by shared Catholicism and a new universal English literacy. The bilingualism is kind of the operational lubricant for a nation of over 7,000 islands.
The Filipino identity is truly a profound synthesis. It's a cultural product, forged in the fires of foreign influence. It's what makes the culture so incredibly adaptive and resilient, but also, constantly trying to define itself outside of those externally imposed boundaries.
Okay, so if identity is the synthesis, then nothing reflects that mixed heritage better than the kitchen, right? Let's shift from the architecture of governance to the architecture of cuisine.
Filipino cuisine is, it's literally history on a plate. It's a reflection of its Malay roots, the deep Chinese and Arab trade influences, and then that big Spanish and American overlay.
You can see the indigenous roots and techniques like quinoa. It literally means eaten raw.
Yeah.
It's this method where fresh fish is chemically cooked just by the acidity of vinegar, often with ginger, chili, and onion. That is ancient knowledge of preservation and flavoring. It's a lot like ceviche or Hawaiian poke.
And that technique stands in such a direct and fascinating contrast to the most prominent Spanish culinary import, which was the art of stewing.
That was a totally non-pre-colonial technique.
Completely. Indigenous cooking was often, quick grilled, steamed, or boiled. It wasn't based on browning meat and then doing a long, slow simmer.
And those Spanish-derived stews are really the heart of the national celebratory menu. It's the fiesta food. We're talking dishes like callos, which is that tripe stew with chorizo.
Menudo, the pork and tomato stew, or machado, which is that larded beef simmered in soy and tomato sauce.
They're complex, really labor-intensive dishes. They're designed for social sharing.
And this brings us to the modern contradiction we flagged earlier. Despite this incredibly rich fusion-heavy history and this rising global interest in Filipino food, many contemporary Western visitors, especially travelers coming from, say, Thailand or Vietnam,
With their amazing street food scenes.
exactly, they surprisingly rate the local food experience as bad or, mid.
That disconnect is massive. How can historically rich food be so disappointing in the modern context? Is it a flavor profile thing, or is it a systemic issue with, delivery?
It's often systemic. Tourists arriving from neighboring countries are looking for those immediate, vibrant, light flavors of easily accessible street-side offerings.
Right.
Filipino food, especially the stews, is often hearty. It's deeply comforting. It's based on this sour, salty, fatty profile that requires time and is really meant to be shared conversationally. It just doesn't lend itself to solo, quick consumption that easily.
There's a practical side too, right? The infrastructure gap has to play a huge role here. The lack of reliable refrigeration or consistent power means that maintaining the hygiene standards you need for high-volume, quick-service street food is a massive challenge.
A huge challenge for many small vendors, especially with raw ingredients. This forces the culinary center back towards home cooking or into these structured, air-conditioned restaurants that can actually afford the operational costs.
So the tourist is kind of left with a choice, either expensive, formal dining, or simpler, less varied quick eats like the famous Jollibee, or, grilled skewers like I saw that are resilient to the high heat.
The infrastructure prevents the beautiful cuisine from being consistently and hygienically delivered at a street level, which is what the modern traveler is so often looking for.
And that ties directly into our next section, doesn't it? Because if the food experience is disappointing, it's probably because the infrastructure that supports access to that experience is fundamentally broken.
Exactly.
Let's get concrete with the numbers. This is where the cost of systemic failure becomes just glaringly obvious. Despite having genuinely world-class scenery, Coron, El Nido, the Chocolate Hills, The Philippines is firmly stuck in the third tier of Southeast Asian tourism.
The comparison is stark. The Philippines really struggles to pull in, what, 5.4 million annual visitors? You contrast that with Thailand at 36 million or Vietnam at 18 million. The disparity is just vast.
They are dramatically undershooting their potential.
Yeah.
And it's not because of a lack of beauty, it's a lack of efficiency.
Visitors are actively choosing Bali. They're choosing Phuket. Not because the nature is intrinsically better, but because the experience is convenient and efficient.
We can call it the friction tax.
That's a good way to put it. And that friction tax is paid mentally through stress and financially through unexpected expenses. This is the unexpected price barrier that often surprises first-time visitors.
And this part astonished me. The logistics are so broken that flights within the Philippines, like taking a domestic flight from Manila to Siargao, or even just between islands in the Visayas, can be significantly more expensive than taking an international flight from Manila to a regional hub like Hong Kong or Singapore.
That high cost of inter-island travel effectively segments the country. It means that local commerce struggles to move goods efficiently and, citizens can't even travel easily around their own country.
And the accommodation prices don't really compensate for this difficulty.
Not at all. Hotels in popular spots like Boracay can match or even exceed the pricing of comparable high-end stays in places like Phuket or Penang, despite often having structurally inferior supporting services.
So you end up paying a premium price for what is often a frustrating experience. Okay, so let's catalog the specific structural complaints. It starts the moment you land, usually at the Ninoy Aquino International Airport, or NAIA.
Manila Airport is.
Wow.
And it's frequently described by travelers as a logistics disaster. The design makes a basic transfer between terminals completely dysfunctional. You often need long, confusing bus rides or taxis just to get from one terminal to another.
And then once you get outside, the public transport system is generally low-end and fragmented. The low-ceiling tricycles, while they're everywhere, force even people of average height to just crouch uncomfortably for the whole trip. It's like a physical manifestation of the infrastructure difficulty.
Then there's the major urban bottleneck, the traffic. Metro Manila traffic is just a horror show of inefficiency. It can often add hours to simple commutes. And this isn't just an inconvenience, it represents a massive loss in economic productivity.
The reliance on private cars or these expensive, unreliable flights just makes domestic travel inherently inefficient and stressful.
And you see the decay at the micro level. People complain about widespread trash, poor sanitation, the lack of maintenance and upkeep of buildings and infrastructure, even in designated tourist areas. It creates a visually exhausting environment that its rivals just don't have.
And for the modern economic engine, for digital nomads, the digital divide is maybe the biggest failure point. Poor internet, patchy 4G and 5G coverage, and the notorious power outages.
Those power outages are systemic, especially once you get outside major commercial hubs like Manila and Cebu. We're talking multiple blackouts in a single day, or sometimes outages that last for days on end.
Which is lethal to anyone trying to work remotely.
It's lethal, and critically, it cripples the massive business process outsourcing, the BPO and call center industries that rely entirely on 247 power and connectivity.
Okay, so here's where the architect of conspiracy premise really comes into play. This pervasive, persistent lack of investment, this structural failure. It can't be accidental. It has to be a feature, not a bug, of a deeply entrenched system. Why build a decent road if you can make more money stealing the funds that were earmarked for the road?
The systemic failure is tied directly to elite graft. If money is allocated for a new train line, a better airport shuttle, or fiber optic cables, that money is often intercepted long before it can serve the public. We're not just talking about a bribe here or there. We're talking about sophisticated mechanisms of extraction.
What did those mechanisms look like specifically? How was the money gobbled up?
It typically involves things like rigged bidding processes for major public works projects. Officials will set up ghost projects that exist only on paper, or they'll severely overpay for low-quality materials from companies they secretly own.
Or did they just delay things?
Or they simply delay the release of funds for years until inflation or budget cuts make the original project impossible, which then allows the surplus funds to be diverted elsewhere. The inefficiency is actively subsidized by corruption because the terrible system guarantees a profit for the political class while limiting economic growth for everyone else.
So the system stays terrible as proof that someone is profiting by keeping it that way. Let's shift to safety, because that's another major deterrent for travelers. The Philippines is often flagged as the least safe country for travelers. But we have to look beyond the clickbait narrative of simple street crime.
Right, we have to deconstruct the safety metric itself. That least safe designation includes systemic factors that have nothing to do with individual crime. Only about 20% of that score is actual violence or theft.
What's the other 80%?
The majority covers things like exposure to natural disasters and the quality of the healthcare infrastructure.
And the geography of the Philippines puts it at a constant disadvantage there.
Absolutely. It sits squarely on the Pacific Ring of Fire, which means frequent earthquakes and volcanic activity. And it faces constant exposure to super typhoons, which are just increasing in intensity due to climate change. That structural vulnerability to nature is a constant component of the country's danger profile.
And then there's the healthcare infrastructure component, which is a chilling measure of poverty.
The healthcare system often functions as a one-way valve out, especially for people with serious conditions who need specialized care. The metric includes things like hospital beds per capita and budget allocation. And while Manila and Cebu have decent private facilities, if you can afford them, accessing quality emergency care in rural areas can easily take an hour or more.
And we've heard these heartbreaking reports about the reality of poverty-driven medical scarcity. The cost of basic medicine, antibiotics, even simple IV drips is often completely unaffordable for the poorest citizens.
Yes. There are these devastating stories of children or elderly citizens dying in hospitals simply because their families could not afford the fundamental medical care or supplies necessary for treatment.
Wow.
That infrastructure deficit in basic medical safety, where the difference between life and death is $10, is a profound component of the country's danger profile. The danger isn't just the individual criminal. The danger is the system's failure to protect you from nature or basic illness.
This cycle of systemic failure in infrastructure and healthcare, it inevitably funnels all the wealth and power upward. And this brings us to the political architecture that feeds that gap, the machinery of power that runs on extraction.
And the historical template for this modern cycle of abuse was really set during the Marcos era, specifically Ferdinand Marcos's presidency from 1965 to 1986.
Right.
He leveraged massive amounts of foreign debt, often funneled through his cronies, and then declared martial law in 1972 to consolidate all political and economic power into his own hands.
Martial law was the mechanism. That's what allowed the transition from a democracy to pure crony capitalism.
It was. It allowed Marcos to silence the press, imprison his political rivals, and just dismantle any institutional checks and balances. The economic policies were simple: prioritize the enrichment of the political elite, and the Marcos family, famously exemplified by the immense, ostentatious lifestyle of his wife, Imelda.
All while the national debt soared and the majority of the population just stagnated.
Exactly.
And the really chilling reality is that this legacy didn't end with the 1986 People Power Revolution. We're literally witnessing a dynastic cycle being completed right now.
The return of the Marcos family to the highest office, with Bongbong Marcos becoming president, was facilitated by a very calculated political alliance with the Duterte family. And this was not just some organic surge of popularity.
No.
It was the result of sophisticated power leveraging, including the reported use of massive coordinated disinformation campaigns, similar to the ones allegedly employed by Cambridge Analytica, which effectively rewrote history and eroded critical thinking among a huge portion of the electorate.
So the architecture of power involves leveraging dynastic history, debt, and sophisticated modern digital disinformation to maintain the elite's grip. And we see that same template of extraction being executed on the national economy today with specific accusations surrounding the Maharlika Fund.
The Maharlika Fund is a powerful symbol of this ongoing political and financial extraction. We should probably define it first.
Yeah.
It was created as the Philippines' first sovereign wealth fund. It was intended to invest state assets for the long-term benefit of the nation, things like infrastructure and energy security.
But the controversy started immediately, didn't it? The question of where the money was actually coming from.
Yes. Initially, there were proposals to draw significant capital from the public pension system and national banks, which led to a huge public backlash about the risk to people's retirement savings.
Of course.
And while they eventually revised the funding sources, the fundamental risk remained. The fund was placed under the control of government appointees, and its establishment was rushed, leading to all these accusations of a lack of oversight.
And the most damning accusations of graft targeting current leadership, including members of the Marcos family and other powerful figures like Martin Romualdez, suggests that this fund, which was intended for national benefit, just became a new vehicle for extracting national wealth for personal use.
It just reinforces the political architecture. The political class isn't interested in steering the ship toward future prosperity. They are drilling holes in the hull to collect the floating debris. They are actively undermining the nation's long-term financial health for immediate private gain.
Okay, let's talk about how this structural poverty gets monetized and externalized onto the most vulnerable. This leads us directly to the passport bro economy. It's a fraught topic, but it's essential for understanding the local economic reality.
The passport bro phenomenon is a chilling demonstration of how severe global currency disparities intersect with deep structural poverty. These are often Western travelers, primarily men, who intentionally target countries like the Philippines because their currency provides them with just this outsized purchasing power.
It allows them to effectively live like a king.
By exploiting the local economic situation, yes.
And the explicit financial motive is key here. It's not just about tourism. It's about accessing women due to a desperation that's driven by economic imbalance.
And this is where the interpreter of secrets angle has to come in, to analyze the economic reality of the local women involved. Because if you are a woman working in a typical decent job, say a call center, your net salary after deductions and travel costs might be, well, next to nothing compared to the cost of living or supporting an extended family.
That structural poverty is what strips away privilege and agency. When local wages are that low, the pursuit of a foreign partner often shifts from being a romantic preference to a necessary financial strategy.
The foreign man, who might be earning an average $68,000 net salary in the West, becomes a necessary ATM for the woman and her family.
It creates this transactional dependency loop that's fueled by systemic inadequacy.
Right. And while a Filipina may genuinely seek loyalty, love, and social status in the relationship, and often finds acceptance for this dynamic in her community, unlike in some neighboring countries, the monetary expectation is a foundational reality driven by the sheer necessity of survival.
And this structural vulnerability fuels the shadow economy, specifically the illicit sex trade. The illegality of prostitution is circumvented by this cynical, almost institutionalized mechanism that avoids any official classification.
The laws are actively dodged through linguistic and administrative trickery. Women, and devastatingly girls, are classified as entertainers, not sex workers. Payments for sexual services, even transactions involving minors, sometimes as low as $38 for a short time, are disguised.
How?
The money is paid by the patron to the bar as a bar fine, a penalty for the woman leaving her shift early.
It's just an internal accounting trick.
An accounting trick that skirts legal liability for the establishment and often for the officials who benefit from this trade.
And the most damning detail is the government's lack of vigorous prosecution. While the Duterte administration was relentless in its crackdown on the drug trade, the resources devoted to combating the illicit sex industry were minimal. They failed to investigate or prosecute officials who were allegedly involved in trafficking crimes.
It suggests a profound systemic tolerance or even complicity for this form of exploitation. The architecture protects the structure of graft, whether it's in national wealth funds or in human lives.
But the narrative isn't monolithic. If the official system is designed for bureaucrat capitalism and elite extraction, we also see the seeds of a radical counter-narrative emerging locally, one that threatens the entire established order.
That counter-narrative is the idea of cooperatives and syndicalism, local mutual aid structures. This model resonates so deeply because it offers an immediate, tangible alternative to the failed top-down system.
It's shared control of resources, dignity in labor, mutual aid for survival.
Exactly.
So why is this concept shared control of local enterprise, which seems so economically sound, why is it heavily suppressed by the political elite?
Because it represents a true existential challenge to the dynastic power structure we just detailed. If local people take shared control of their resources, their labor, their markets, they cut off the opportunities for elite extraction.
They cut them off from the money.
The ultra-wealthy and the corrupt political class have a vested interest in keeping co-ops from growing because it fundamentally starves the mechanism of corruption. If the people can feed themselves and govern their own small economies, they don't need the corrupt system, and the entire extraction business model just collapses. It's a suppressed topic because it threatens the flow of money.
We've spent so much time detailing the immense structural dysfunction and the political sabotage, and yet the human reality of the Philippines is one of profound warmth, humor, and resilience. How does the culture survive this systemic abuse without just collapsing into complete cynicism?
It survives by developing these cultural mechanisms of defense and resilience. One of the first things travelers notice is the local etiquette. The extremely high value placed on humility and non-confrontation.
That translates into clear social expectations. Loud, aggressive, or flashy behavior from foreigners, the exact behavior many of the exploiters engage in, is actively frowned upon. It immediately marks the individual as attracting the wrong kind of attention.
It's a mechanism for preserving social harmony and for spotting predators.
And this deep-seated respect extends centrally to the family unit, right? Notably, the profound necessary respect for elders.
Yes, and this is symbolized by the gesture of motto, where a younger person takes the elder's hand and gently touches it to their own forehead. It emphasizes hierarchy and deference, a necessary structure for collective survival in a precarious environment.
The flip side of that necessary deference is the collective celebration, the social bonding that serves as a release valve. Even amid all the poverty and struggle, the social life is paramount.
You can just think of the social hubs. In cities like Cebu, the social life is often driven by karaoke culture. Places like Redbox or K1 Family KTV, they aren't just entertainment. They are vital community centers where people gather, sing, release tension, and connect.
And of course, the late-night eats, the street food stalls, and the 247 fast food joints, they serve as the necessary gathering point after hours, binding people together through shared experience. But now let's reintroduce the cynical engine that's powering that social release. The alcohol industry, which is deeply, deeply interwoven with the national identity.
San Miguel is not just a major brand, it's a massive, powerful conglomerate that actively links its product beer to the national shared history and the essence of Filipino socializing. Their marketing is just ubiquitous. It promotes this idea of shared experience and anywhere, anytime consumption.
And the harms of that pervasive alcohol consumption are, generally acknowledged, but mostly ignored by the authorities.
Right.
But here's the profound, sick irony that holds the whole system in place.
The dependency loop.
The tax revenue generated from alcohol, tobacco, and sugary drinks is explicitly directed toward funding universal health care.
You have a complete and absolute dependency loop. The very industry that contributes to social and health harms is simultaneously the financial backbone of the public healthcare system that is supposed to treat those harms. The government needs the vice tax revenue to provide basic care, making it politically impossible to impose meaningful restrictions or address the societal harms caused by alcohol dependence.
The addiction funds the treatment.
It's a staggering, cynical circle.
Finally, let's talk about the psychological defense mechanisms, the fierce counter-narrative of justice that exists just beneath the surface of supposed subservience. We heard this idea that Filipinos, especially the older generations, are too subservient to ever stand in solidarity.
And that view is just contradicted by a powerful undercurrent of fierce justice that runs contrary to any generalized assumption of weakness. It's particularly evident in the sharp revolutionary critique of rape culture that exists within the local community.
We saw local satire aimed directly at potential perpetrators of rape. It's a revolutionary counter-narrative designed to assign blame squarely where it belongs.
That satirical graphic, for instance, it instructs the perpetrator to announce their intent to rape, to ask for consent, and then it highlights the complete absurdity of the situation.
Because a true rapist is incapable of that.
Incapable of that self-control or self-reflection. This isn't just dark humor, it's a profound cultural tool. It shifts the entire narrative away from victim blaming and acts as this potent cultural defense mechanism. It proves that the fierce spirit of justice, the one that ignited the revolution against Spain and the people power against Marcos, it still burns brightly, even if the state apparatus is too corrupt to enforce it.
Is the difference between being politically subdued by a dynastic system and being spiritually or morally subservient. The culture refuses the latter.
Yes. So if we synthesize this profound contradiction, we are left with a duality that just defines the Philippines, a nation holding a profound spiritual and cultural identity, a true synthesis forged by faith and survival, while simultaneously enduring this massive political and economic sabotage orchestrated by its own elite.
It's a country that is cannibalizing its own material future. But the resilience of the people is the defining constant. The hospitality, the optimism, the sheer will to survive remains, even when the government and infrastructure are doing everything possible to create friction and misery.
So what does that resilience mean for the future? Its true strength seems to be its ability to survive systemic self-destruction, to wait patiently for the day the structural extraction model finally collapses under its own inherent weight. It suggests a deep well of human strength that simply cannot be extinguished by corruption or typhoons.
Which brings us all the way back to where we started. the Pacific as the rising center. If the ultimate destination for the soul isn't a place of banks or bombs, but a land of memory and a spiritual center, then how long can the Philippines' current ugly material reality, the terrible traffic, the failed infrastructure, the dynastic corruption, the poor connectivity, how long can it hold back its profound cultural and human destiny?
The unseen narrative is that the people already possess the soul of the country. They are just waiting for the material world to catch up. And that moment, when the gap finally closes, will be a revelation for the entire world.
Until the next time we peel back another layer of the known world and explore what happens when ancient power structures try to maintain control in a world that's decided to stop listening to them, stay curious and keep connecting those unseen dots.
This episode is powered by Neon Core Media for stories they said were too real to tell.